It was 1966, and I had a 19-year-old brother. The young men in Vietnam, for the most part, were pretty much the same age he was, and even though I wasn't clear about why we were in Vietnam, I just really felt a need to go and help take care of those guys.
I think veterans, when they went over there, thought that they were going over there to help out that country, to fight communism or to help, the country, through that war experience.
Everyone was volunteering because they wanted to have it on their service records. So I figured I'd volunteer too because I knew I wouldn't go. The day that the orders arrived, everybody got their orders in the company compartment except me. I had to report to the old man because he wanted to present my orders to me personally because he was so damn proud of me because I was the only one that had orders directly into Vietnam.
Well, the first 3 months you're just kind of getting used to the situation there, and then after about 3 months you pretty much settle in and you're pretty relaxed, as well as you can be in that situation. You've kind of accepted the possibility that you may not get out of this alive, and you kind of existentially adjust to the situation. The thing that becomes difficult is the last couple of months you're there, then you start getting kind of nervous again because you think, well, I might actually make it out of here, so then you become a little more nervous and a little more edgy.
Survival is always the key. My survival, my partner's survivals. When I was involved with the infantry, it was everybody around me because my job was the responsibility to call in the artillery, to gunships and stuff when we were in contact, make sure they didn't bomb us or shoot us. And when I was in the helicopter, it was just me and a pilot. And if I didn't see something on the ground and we got shot out of the air, it was his life, my life combination. So yeah, intensity was very high all the time.
We worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week when it wasn't busy, and when it was busy, we worked until the work was done, however long that took.
We were so inundated the first few weeks I was there, it was unreal. At one point in time, I operated 72 hours straight. And the CO of the hospital finally closed the hospital down, and they overflew us because the docs couldn't stand up. We were so tired.
Being a head nurse of a 67-bed unit with an occupancy rate of 85 to 95% all the time, you grow up. And you learn how to deal with adversity better. And certainly working long shifts and being hot and being on concrete floors and so forth was nothing compared to what the fellows went through. Just developed so much respect for these young men, most of whom were not volunteers.
I think it was just the idea of you didn't know if you're going to leave there or not. We have had people die their last mission, their last day, and I didn't want to put like a quote of jinx on me by saying, oh, I got 2 days left or 1 day left, and that, so.
Terrified. I was afraid that I would get wounded or killed or something. It was just one of those things you had no control. You're just waiting to leave and hoping and praying that you get out of there.
February 16th of '68, when I had about 3 months left in country, we were on an operation called Buffalo, which was along a chain of villages called the Dai Dao chain, just north of Dong Ha. And we were taking a lot of fire. There was another unit out there with us that had been ambushed and took a lot of fire. We came into a village and started taking small arms fire, and I rounded a corner of a hut trying to move to a position where I could return fire. And as I rounded the corner of this hut, I found a North Vietnamese standing in front of me about 5 feet, and he opened up on me before I saw him. And he hit me, I was carrying an M16 at the time. He hit the stock of my M16 once and then hit me through the shoulder, and it drove about a 3-inch piece of my collarbone out through my back.
I got my orders in a hot little hand, and my replacement showed up, and I gave him a big hug and said, sayonara. And headed down to Da Nang. Unfortunately, I had to spend the night in Da Nang, and that night they got rocketed, and I can remember diving into a bunker.
Getting on the plane was one thing. You're always looking over your shoulder, making sure someone ain't going to get shot or whatever. And then they loaded the wounded, the hurt first, and you waited for them to get done. And then we all filed aboard, and everybody's just quiet, just solemn. Nobody was saying anything on our plane. It was just like, let's get out. You could just feel the tension, because I knew I was really tension, and nobody, the stewardess were trying to be, hey, welcome back guys, we're going home, all this stuff, and nobody was talking. Everybody just sat there and just kind of, okay. And then my first great feeling was liftoff, when you're actually going down the runway and you're in the air. Then it was like, oh, we're out of here. And then about 5 minutes later, we cheered. A lot of people started cheering and that.
Well, even on the commercial flight, you're still worried about taking incoming, because as you leave the airport, of course, you're flying over residential areas and stuff of Da Nang and heading up into the sky, and you're still worried about taking incoming, small arms fire or RPGs or something, until you get up in the air high enough so that it's interesting. It kind of spontaneously, everyone in the plane realized when we were finally high enough, there's no way they could get you. And just all of a sudden, everybody almost all exactly at the same time started cheering and clapping, because they were so happy to have made it out of there alive, essentially, and uninjured.
It was packed. The minute we got over water, everybody cheered. I mean, it was obvious that we were the hell out of there, pardon my French.
My memory is that it was very quiet. I mean, we got on the plane and everybody was just sort of looking at one another. It was early in the morning. Some of the guys were not completely sober, let's say. Some of them were very hungover. It was a very subdued atmosphere. The whole flight was really very, very quiet. There wasn't any cheering. There wasn't any great sigh of relief. I think everybody on the flight was probably like me. They were pretty much just relieved to be out, but still very numb from what had happened towards the end of the war.
I just think the coming home process was different for each one of us. I'm sure each of the guys you talked to today probably had a little different experience. And
I was basically living out in the rice paddies in the mountains, just like a year-long camping trip, so you're kind of living out in the bush, you're not around any kind of urban stuff or city, buildings, and of course there's light discipline, so there's no lights or anything for a year. So coming into San Francisco, it was pretty amazing to see all those lights on, and it just seemed like when you came in, there was just a lot of activity, a lot of noise, a lot of activity, people running around, lights and everything. So it just seemed pretty chaotic, because you're used to being just kind of out by your foxhole, looking at the stars at night, very quiet in rural settings. So it was seemed really kind of energetic and chaotic coming back. And
we signed our final papers, and they funneled us in the bus back to the airport, and that was my first time seeing the protesters. I heard spitting and that, but I didn't see it. But throwing of eggs, maybe at the buses they're throwing stuff. When we were there, it was mostly a baby killer, and all this stuff. And most of us got pretty mad, because it's like, you didn't know what we did. You weren't there, How do you know I wasn't in Korea, or I was in Germany, And so it was a lot of animosity, I would say, right at that point, and anger from being happy, did my duty, going home, to who are these jerks, these hippies, and so on down the line. Took me about a half a walk through the airport, and I was watching a couple guys going into clothing stores, coming out with clothes, going in the bathroom. I walked in the bathroom to go to the bathroom, and I seen uniforms in the garbage cans. I went, not a bad idea. So I did the same thing they did.
And then my plane was flying from San Francisco to Denver to Boston. And I remember we got on the plane sort of in a rush. I got on, I had a window seat. It was one of these three in a row seats. And I had the window seat, and it was up near the front of the plane. And as I sat down and I looked to see who else was getting on. And this mother and her young child, 3 or 4 years old, got on. They were coming down the aisle, and mother stopped and looked, and the young child came in and ran up beside me. And, I smiled, I said hi, And I heard the mother saying to the stewardess, "Please move us. I don't want my child sitting next to that baby killer." It was 30 years ago, 1972. And it still hurts. And it was at that point that I realized that I was basically an alien in my native land. It was the same feeling I'd had when I'd arrived at Ton Sanut in Saigon and got off the plane. I was an alien.
You went over as an individual, came back as an individual pretty much, and it was pretty much up to you to adjust, you know. It was kind of on the backs of the veteran to come back and make a go of it. And some people did a pretty good job of it. Some people had a harder time, you know, but it was difficult for everyone coming back. And I think we've learned a lot in terms of the types of supports that we provide veterans when they come back from war experiences now. I think we're a lot better at that as a country because of what happened in Vietnam. At least, hopefully, we're doing a better job of that.
But I hope we that came back from our war have been able to convince enough people that, you know, you can hate the war, but don't hate the warrior. You know, they don't a lot of times have an option of whether to go or not. And they're just over there trying to do what they think is the right thing to do and try to do it as best they can.
The thing that I had a very hard time and still do to this day is that, you know, wars are not caused by the military. These are political. I don't care whose government it is, they're political. And your military is doing what they're told to do. They're doing their job, and don't blame them on the politics of any war. And yes, I was just very disenchanted with the attitude that was being demonstrated against our troops. That really upset me.
There wasn't, and there has not been a day since I got back that at some point in the day I don't think about the various events that happened. I did not want to talk about it to anyone.
Even though I suffer some physical consequences, some health consequences, if I knew then what I know now, I'd do it again in a second.
We got a situation going on now with Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and that. And the guys coming back are pretty much in the same situation we were, not knowing who the enemy was, when they're going to attack, how, or anything like that. And those guys coming back need to know where they can go for help, or even think about or talk to their peers over stuff so they don't end up doing real foolish things to themselves or their families.
Vietnam was controversial, just as Iraq is today. And yet, one of my patients, I think, said it well. He was a young man who had been offered a full scholarship to college to play football, and he turned it down in order to enlist. Because he said, as a citizen, he felt he had responsibilities. So when people are talking about rights, which we do a lot these days, we need to remember that we have equal responsibility. And whether you choose to serve it in the military or in some other capacity, I think we all need to look at providing that service at some point in our lives.